All right, everybody. Today we're going to talk about how I think you can go about designing your own game and prototyping your own game, because I think it'd be a cool thing to be able to do over the summer or something like that. You can start now, you can start later, but these are the steps that I followed when I'm designing my game, and steps that I've kind of synthesized from doing a lot of research about it. First off, we need to identify that the goal of game design is to make something that's fun. And it doesn't necessarily mean fun for everybody. It could just be something that you want to make, something that you think would be fun. And that's actually what me and my friends set out to do when we were designing our game, which is I wanted to make a game that I would have on my shelf at the end of this and I would want to play. And from our last couple play tests, or maybe our last couple months of play testing, we're getting really close. The game that I've designed, I'm finding extremely fun, so I'm super happy with how it's going. So other projects, or certain goals that you could set for your project. Some people want to publish their game. They want to get a publisher, which is a company who takes your game and turns it into a finished product and sells it, right? Some people want to put it on Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding source where people might say, "Oh, I want to buy that game," so they'd give you money to make that game. Uh, and it could be something else. A lot of people have different design challenges that they pose themselves. Sometimes they just want to make a game about, drilling to the center of the earth, and that's their goal, is to make that game. It doesn't really matter what the any other part of it is. So two important parts about design and development is that when you're designing a game, it's just making the basic rules of the game, and it doesn't take much time. You're designing components and cards and effects and stuff like that. Development is kind of the later stage of game design, where you are going through iterations of doing play tests and taking things from one form and tweaking them into another. It's like you're editing and revising when you're writing. That's what the development part is. So before we get into what I think the best kind of orders to creating your own game or prototype are, I think that we need to talk about theme and mechanics. So theme is a word that you've probably heard before, same with mechanics, but they have a little more specific meanings when talking about board game design. So theme is the subject matter that the game is built around. So you could talk about war, fantasy, spies. Like I said, drilling to the center of the earth. That could be the theme of your game. I know I know one that was brought up in a podcast that I thought was cool, which was like building an ant farm. So you'd have to like get different types of ants, and they would do different things, which is a bizarre theme. I've never seen it before, but it sounded kind of cool. So chess is a really good example of what we call an abstract game. Abstract games tend not to have very much theme, if any. But chess still has a little bit. And the theme of chess is probably something close to war. Maybe not explicitly, but that's generally, you have two armies or two forces and they're fighting each other and taking each other's pieces, right? Risk is a lot more of a thematic version of that same, or an exploration of that same theme, where Risk is explicitly about war. It's you've got your forces, you've got soldiers, and they're taking different parts of the world. And then you've got games that are extremely thematic, but with fairly different themes. So Battlestar Galactica is based off of a show where some humans, they're in space in this big ship. Some humans are robots that are indistinguishable. So one player actually secretly plays as a robot. You don't know who it is when you start the game, and they're trying to make everyone else lose. And this is one of, I think, the most thematic games that I own or have played ever. And then there's another type of game that we kind of call a Euro game, which doesn't have a lot of theme. This one's called Orléans, and I don't know. The theme is like being in a French city, kind of, and you just like try and get points. So there's not a lot of theme there. Uh, but the flip side of theme is that there's mechanics. So all these games have mechanics. Queens can move in any direction, as many spaces as they want. The knights can hop over, but only move in an L shape. So those are the mechanics of the game. This is elements of gameplay that make it function. Um, in Battlestar Galactica, giving everybody at the very start a face down card that tells them whether they're a human or a Cylon or a robot. Uh, that's a mechanic. That's a hidden role mechanic or a trader mechanic. And these Euro games tend to have a much higher focus on the mechanics of the game. It's about a system of mechanics that they think is interesting and fun to play with. And the kind of general goal of Euro games is who understands that system the best and can manipulate it the most efficiently to get the most points. So these are fairly heady games. Euros, a lot of people really love them. I'm not a huge fan of them personally. However, there are a couple that are very high up on my list, and this is one of them, because I think they're quite excellent in terms of fun systems. Some Euro games I don't find very fun, which, again, if we go back to our goals, that's what it should be. And if we talk about it's not for everybody, everyone has their own tastes, right? So don't worry if some people don't think your game is fun, or even if you don't think your game is fun, you should scrap it and make something that is fun. And maybe someone will like that game, but you know, I think generally you want to make games that you think are fun. So there's a lot of common mechanics. You can look up mechanics online, board game mechanics, but really common ones include drafting, which is everyone has a hand of cards. They pick one to choose and then pass the hand of cards to the person next to them in the circle. And then everyone is kind of drafting a card that way. That's what that's called. Trader mechanics are pretty common. BSG is maybe, or Battlestar Galactica is one of the best, I think, for that. Dice-based combat, like in Risk, is very, very common. So there's a lot of common mechanics that you can research. Um, but these two things, juxtaposed, theme and mechanics, oftentimes people, or traditionally, people would think that there's two types of games. There's the Euro games, which are very heavy mechanics, and then there's what's called like Ameritrash games, or uh, they have a lot of theme, but they don't have very robust mechanics. There's a lot of dice, there's a lot of randomness, so there's not a ton of strategy. But a lot of modern games now are taking theme and mechanics and realizing that you can actually put those two things together um, to, or you, if you're really good, you can blend those two things, and your mechanics create theme, and your theme tells you what mechanics should be in your game. So I think the best games that I've played, the modern games, mix these two things together where they actually support one another. So a good example is I know I played it with a couple people before school closed. Was Survive. So in Survive, you've got all these little tiles on the in the middle of like a water board, and you've got little people on these tiles. And the island, the tiles represent the island of Atlantis, and it's sinking into the water. And those tiles get removed from the board as you play. On everyone's turn, one tile gets removed, and that's a mechanic. You're taking off tiles from the board, but the fact that the ones that are smaller, which are the ones that are closer to the water, disappear first, that mechanic is reinforcing the theme of a sinking island so heavily. It's indistinguishable from the two. That's a really good mechanic that has a lot of theme. Whereas in chess, they're kind of just mechanics, right? Maybe you could say that the queen, since it's stronger, it's higher up, right? That's maybe the closest thing, but it doesn't really feel thematic. It doesn't make me feel like I'm the head of an army when I do it. It is purely for me a mechanical experience when I play chess. Um, and then let's talk briefly about balance. Balance, you've probably heard of this before, but the idea in balance for game design is you can have perfect balance where every strategy or faction in your game is the exact same power level or stronger, not stronger than one or another. Um, but there's two ways to achieve balance, and sometimes games are meant to be imbalanced. There are games that are based off of stories like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, where you're supposed to feel, if you're playing the good guys, you're supposed to feel like it's overwhelming, like the other side is too strong, and that's intentional for a theme. So balance can come from a couple places. Balance in the game, so balance of your mechanics. But also, there's some games that rely on balance from the players. So there's a game called Race for the Galaxy, or sorry, Cosmic Encounter. That's a really good example, where everybody gets dealt an alien race, and then you're basically trying to like negotiate and attack each other to take each other's homeworlds. And in that game, there is like zero balance within the mechanics. There are alien races that it just says like if you take 2 planets, you win the game. And that's so much stronger than everyone else having to take 5 planets. Or there's an alien that says your ships can't die, but everyone else's can normally. So that alien is very, very strong. But since everyone's kind of broken, every guy's broken, or if there's just one who's broken in the game, like if there's 4 of us playing and one person has a super strong alien, everyone's going to gang up on that player because they know they're way too strong. So some games use balance from players as opposed to balance from your mechanics. And let's get into how to design a game. So step 1, you need to come up with an idea for your game. You could come up with a cool theme that you think would make a great game, or you could decide just to use a core mechanic that you think would be fun. And these are kind of the 2 ways people start thinking of ideas for games. And it's okay to do both. It's okay to do one of them. Or if you have a different way of coming up for a game idea, that's totally cool too. I personally usually come up with a theme first, and then I think of mechanics that will work well with that. However, one of the game ideas me and my friend have had recently started as a mechanic, and then we decided this would also be a cool theme that would actually work well with that mechanic. Oftentimes, you'll think of a bunch of both of these, and then you just have to pair 2 that work well together. This is a big brainstorming process, and this can take days or weeks, and it's not always active, right? Sometimes I like wake up and I'm like, oh, hey, this would be a cool idea. Or sometimes I'm watching TV and I realize, or I'm watching a movie and I'm like, wow, that would be a really cool experience to try and have in a game. So I write that down. One of the core things is you got to write everything down if you have these ideas. Like have a document on your computer or have a little handbook or something that you're writing stuff down in, like a little journal. So step 2, start writing stuff down. After you have some ideas, or even during the brainstorm. Step 1 and 2 are kind of at the same time, I would say. Um, but once you have an idea you want to pursue, you move kind of to a more serious version of step 2, where you're going to have to start writing down or brainstorming, okay, what's going to make this game work? What components do I need? Do I need cards? Do I need tokens? Do I need characters, little miniatures or standees to represent characters? And you also have to think about the structure of the game, the overall structure. Is there turns? Is there rounds? Does everyone play at the same time? Is it cooperative? Is it competitive? And then you need to design card effects, component effects. You can think about the player count. Although a lot of this stuff can be done separately, you only need enough of this to actually start trying to see if the game will work. Um, and this one is a little weird, but the feel that you want players to have and strategies you want to have in the game are something I think about a lot, where it's a little like zoomed out, where if I want a certain experience to be had from this game, I'm thinking about that usually from the start. So if I've got like one of the game ideas that we have, me and my friend have, is like a space horror game, and I want that to feel kind of scary and tense. So the components and the mechanics I'm going to be thinking about are always going to be trying to make that feeling. There's tension and kind of nervousness. Oh, there's no picture in this one. Oops. Well, anyways, designing your own game is prototyping. That's the step 3 of designing a game. Once you've written stuff down, once you've brainstormed your idea and all this stuff, one of the best things to do if you're kind of okay, I've got my idea for a game and it's all kind of starting to come together, is just start writing stuff down, like on components, like cut paper into cards and make cards, and you kind of need to do a bad prototype first. So initial prototypes will be quick, messy, and ugly. That's what makes them fun. Is because there's the stakes have never been lower when you're designing these. Um, and take the like we have a printed prototype here for our game, but take the even simpler route of go paper, pen, pencil, use glue, use tokens from other games or coins if you don't have many other games. You could go out and pick blades of grass if you really wanted to, and use those as tokens. Like this should be the simplest way to get your game playable. That's the idea of an initial prototype or your first initial prototypes. This is a prototype, I think maybe the first one from our game that we've been working on. We've been working on it for about 5 or 6 years, mostly as a hobby. Um, But this is our first prototype. It's white printer paper and pencil and pen, and we got dice here, and it's really simple, right? You'll notice all of this is just written down for us. Like, there's no way that a player is going to be expected to remember what these 8 letters stand for, right? But this is for us. This is just to see if it works. We've got our cards over here. Over here, and we've got some other components here that we've clearly written on. This is how your first prototype should look. The goal is just to make your game playable, and it's super common to make your first prototype and then go, oh, our game mechanics don't even work together. There's no win condition, there's an infinite loop here. But don't be discouraged. That's the point. It's a good thing. The most foolproof way to figure out issues with your game's design is to play test it. So prototyping is the best way to do that. So here's another shot of our prototype kind of mid-play session, right? We've got dice scattered all over. We've got some, look, we're using, I think, rubber bands and paper clips as some components. So it should be ugly. It's going to be ugly. This is our second prototype that we made where we started color coding everything just to help organize things so everything wasn't white paper. You could do this in a cheaper and easier way where you just take a marker and put a dot on certain things that are red or certain things that are blue, and you just put a blue dot on there. It does the same thing. And we've iterated a couple times. So this was one of our more recent prototypes, maybe from 2 years ago. And now we've got a digital prototype that we're using. And this is our new digital prototype. We've got placeholder art and everything. We've done some graphic design and everything. And this is where our game's at. We're going to make a hard copy version of this soon, probably this summer. But you'll notice the progression. This is very late. This is like 5 years ago we made this. Or 5 years ago we started making this game. And this digital prototype happened this year because we felt it was good enough to kind of start putting onto the computer, and we can get people to play test a little easier that way. So after you've done your first prototype, you got to go back to the drawing board. You're going to play a bunch, and you're going to go, wow, there's a ton of stuff wrong with this. It's not very fun, or this mechanic isn't good. And you tweak and change your rules. And at first, you can change the rules like during your playtesting, right? You can write like, okay, well, we'll just do it this way for now, and write that down. But as the game works more smoothly, or rather, your first changes should be just trying to make the game work smoothly, right? Because oftentimes a game that isn't smooth isn't very fun. So first try and make it smooth, and then as it's working nice and smooth as it's intended, your changes should be trying to make the game more fun. And don't be afraid to make crazy changes or try something weird and try something different. But at the same time, you've got to balance. If you keep changing it, the game will never be done. So step 5 and beyond, there's a bazillion other steps, but we're not going to talk about them here. Once your game is becoming more stable and fun, you can write up a rule book. And I would suggest not doing a really fancy rule book first. Just document your rules basically in a semi-organized way. So if people ask you what the rule is and you don't remember, you can say it. And you can get friends and family to playtest. Once it's really coming together, you can try to do blind playtests, which are you're letting people take the rule book and people you don't know take the rule book, take the game, and they can play it, right? Because oftentimes your friends and family are going to be nice. So they're really good to play test with, but you also want to play test with people who will tell you what's wrong with the game. And here's some smart thoughts to close out. The best is the enemy of the good. Your game's not going to be perfect, uh, and trying to make it perfect is going to be a waste of time at some point. So you have to identify when it's good enough. But you should always be trying for the best. You just have to be happy with good enough. And I don't know where I heard this. It was on a podcast or a seminar or something. A game isn't finished when everything that can be added is added, but when everything that can be removed is removed. So oftentimes you'll add a lot of stuff because you think it'll be really fun, and then it gets kind of complicated. One of the things that you might run into is you want to strip that game down to its core experience. And that's going to make the game the most fun. It's going to make it clean. It's going to make it play quickly. It's going to be awesome. And just because something doesn't work for one game doesn't mean it won't work for another game. If you're stripping down your game and you're getting rid of mechanics and you're getting rid of entire parts of the game, make sure you record what those are, because sometimes those are the perfect thing you need for a different game. And final thoughts: do your research. There's a ton of stuff out there to learn from if you're actually interested in this. Don't worry about sharing your game idea with people. Everybody who designs games has a million ideas, so they don't really care about yours. Um, so they, and even if they do, game ideas aren't worth anything. The work from developing and designing it is what's worth it. Set up a schedule to work on your game, and that's kind of general for anything. Set goals, set timelines. It really helps for productivity. If you're having trouble with something, give it room to breathe. Take a step away for a couple days or a week, and then come back to it. Be organized. This is something that we shot ourselves in the foot with designing our game. But recently we've gotten a lot more organized and wished we had done it that way from the start. We use a lot of Google Docs and we use a lot of Google Sheets, spreadsheets, and have fun. The best way to design games is to do it as a hobby and have fun and design games that you'd want to try playing or you think are interesting. That's it for today, guys. Cheers.